The night of April 12, 1848, in Beaufort, South Carolina, was not meant to be remembered. Yet the darkness itself seemed to conspire with a secret that no one was ever allowed to speak. A fire burned in the distance, smoke curling over the river like a silent warning, but the flames were only a distraction. Behind the walls of Fair Haven, the estate of Judge Cornelius Rutled, a violence so precise, so calculated, unfolded that even the town's most hardened minds could barely comprehend it. By sunrise, 5 men lay mutilated, their bodies violated in a manner that could not be called crime alone. It was vengeance shaped into ritual. The newspapers whispered of a house fire, a story so neat it fooled the untrained eye. But beneath the smoke, under the veneer of propriety, the truth waited. It had a name: Isaac, enslaved, educated, invisible. He had watched the judge and his sons wield power like a weapon, terrorizing everyone around them with a casual cruelty that was almost artistic in its precision. He had kept accounts, measured yields, and documented every transgression, every hidden sin, behind a carefully carved-out ledger no one could ever find. For years, he had accumulated knowledge, a slow-burning map of their corruption. He understood the invisible levers, the systems of fear and obedience that allowed men like the Rutleds to exist untouchable, untethered from consequence. And then, in one night, he used that knowledge. Every detail, every vulnerability, every assumption the judge had about control and fear, he turned against them. This was not the act of a madman. It was the act of a man who had studied the architecture of power and decided that the only justice that mattered was surgical, deliberate, and complete. Listen closely. Every shadowed corner of history is full of names we are told not to speak, of acts we are warned to forget. What you are about to hear is one such story. The kind that changes a man, if he lets it. The kind of truth that whispers, even now, beneath the surface of polite society. Nothing is as it seems, and some consequences are built into the world before birth. Isaac was not a hero in the sense you are taught to admire. He was something far more dangerous. A witness, a recorder, a silent architect of retribution. And as you lean in, remember these are not tales to pass lightly. They are warnings. Fair Haven was a fortress of quiet horrors, built on rivers of sweat and silence, where every man, woman, and child was measured, catalogued, and controlled. Judge Rutled's authority was absolute. His voice alone could condemn a life. His gaze alone could instill terror. Yet even he had blind spots, moments where arrogance and routine blinded him to the subtleties of perception, to the intelligence of someone he believed existed only to obey. Isaac exploited those gaps with the precision of a surgeon, not out of madness, but out of an understanding few men possessed. The mind is the ultimate battlefield, and knowledge is the deadliest weapon. Isaac had been trained in secrecy by his mother, Abigail, whose defiance of forbidden literacy became the seed of something dangerous. She had taught him letters, numbers, codes, and the patterns of human behavior, whispering over candlelight that understanding the world was more powerful than brute strength. "Remember," she had said, "a man who knows too much is dangerous to those who know too little." Isaac had taken those lessons and expanded them quietly, watching, recording, cataloging. The ledgers he kept for the judge were a mask. Beneath them lay his true archive, a ledger of cruelty, of systemic abuse, of secrets so vile that generations would go to their graves to keep them buried. He watched as the judge's sons exercised their power in endless variations: Cornelius Jr. with measured efficiency, Thomas with calculated cruelty, William with legal intimidation, and the twins, Robert and James, with chaos masquerading as dominance. Each had a weakness, and each trusted Isaac in ways they would never admit. They underestimated him because they had never been forced to see him as human, as a mind capable of reasoning beyond instinct. In their world, visibility was power, but Isaac had learned the inverse. Invisibility, when paired with understanding, can make a man untouchable. That night, as the household slept, Isaac moved like the shadow of inevitability. Every lock he bypassed, every quiet step he took, was not just physical. He had anticipated their fears, their assumptions, the patterns of behavior that made them predictable. And he carried with him more than tools, He carried the justice the system had denied, the kind that left no loopholes, no witnesses, no excuses. By morning, Fair Haven would be changed forever. And yet, for decades, the world would pretend nothing had happened. The truth of that night would sit in a leather journal, hidden in a courthouse basement, waiting for the moment when someone brave or foolish enough would stumble upon it. This is where we begin to understand something more dangerous than cruelty itself. The systems that protect men like Rutled are not physical, not legal, they are psychological. And the man who sees them, who maps them, who waits, becomes something neither victim nor villain, but a force the world is unprepared to confront. Isaac's preparation for that night was years in the making. Every ledger he kept, every transaction he recorded, every quiet observation of the judge and his sons built toward this single, inevitable event. To them, he was a competent, obedient slave, the perfect instrument for maintaining wealth and power. But beneath the surface, Isaac had catalogued their sins with the meticulousness of a scholar and the precision of an assassin. He knew who slept where, when each sun would rise, which doors were bolted and which were left vulnerable by routine. He studied the rhythms of Fair Haven as one studies the tides, predictable, measured, and inevitable. The twins, with their penchant for cruelty, always returned late from hunts, drunk, careless. Thomas, obsessed with his father's medical experiments, was meticulous in sterilizing tools and preparing instruments, blind to the one tool he could never control, Isaac himself. Cornelius Jr., the eldest, ran the plantation like clockwork, yet trusted Isaac with ledgers no one else could touch, not realizing that knowledge of their wealth was only a fraction of what Isaac truly understood. William, focused on law and inheritance, assumed reason alone dictated the world. He did not anticipate the intelligence hidden in plain sight. And then there were the shadows in the house. The other slaves, the silent witnesses of abuse, those who feared speaking yet remembered everything. They called Isaac the judge's shadow, the traitor, the one who seemed to straddle both worlds, too close to power to be free, too intelligent to be ignored. They could not see the fire burning beneath his obedience, a fire that would consume the men who had made their lives a cycle of terror. As night fell, Isaac's movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. He was not guided by emotion, but by calculation. Every step he took, every instrument he used, every sound he suppressed, was measured against years of observation. The house itself became his ally, the creaking floorboards, the predictable footsteps, the locked doors, tools he had memorized and mastered. To anyone watching, it was impossible to believe that a single man could orchestrate such precision, could dismantle the power of 5 men who had ruled over others for decades. By the time the first screams echoed through the halls, there was no hesitation, no doubt. The act was surgical. The night held a weight beyond the physical, a symbolic reckoning for generations of terror, cruelty, and silence. It was not just punishment. It was revelation. The ledger of abuses, kept in secret, had found its voice. And this is the point where you must pause and confront something vital. In every system of power, there is always one who watches, one who records, one who waits. Recognize the pattern. Consider this your first instruction. Type the phrase "shadow sees all" twice in the comments if you understand the weight of hidden knowledge, if you are ready to see beyond appearances. Do it, because the deeper you descend, the more you realize that what is unseen shapes the world far more than what is visible. The Rutleds believed themselves untouchable, gods in their own right, ruling Fair Haven with the arrogance of men who had never been questioned. Judge Cornelius, tall, silver-haired, and absolute in his authority, carried the air of inevitability, every word, every gesture, a reminder that he was the law incarnate. His sons were extensions of that power. Cornelius Jr., the eldest, a machine of discipline. Thomas, obsessed with the mechanics of control and medical innovation. William, cunning in law, using rules as weapons, and the twins, Robert and James, embodiments of chaotic entitlement, delighting in terror for amusement. To them, life was a currency they could spend at will, and Isaac was a mere calculator of their wealth. But the judge and his sons were not gods. They were men, and men are fallible. They underestimated the mind that observed them, the ledger that recorded every transgression, every moment of cruelty. Isaac had learned to see them not as masters, but as patterns, predictable, flawed, and ultimately vulnerable. In their hubris, they left openings they could not perceive. The casual cruelty of the twins, the obsession of Thomas, the legal arrogance of William, the rigid control of Cornelius Jr. all became instruments in Isaac's silent symphony. The plantation itself mirrored their psychology. Rooms were arranged for efficiency, not morality. The study, where ledgers were kept, was both a temple of order and a tomb of secrets. Tools for punishment, instruments of experimentation, receipts for chemical purchases all lay hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those who knew to look beyond appearances. Isaac did. He read the rhythm of the household like a manuscript. When the doors closed, when the sons drank too long, when the judge's authority slipped into indulgence. These were moments of opportunity, moments that would become the scaffold of his reckoning. And yet, Isaac's world was not devoid of observation. Other slaves watched, feared, and whispered, sensing that he straddled two realities: servant and sovereign of knowledge, prisoner and master of truth. Their silence was both complicity and protection, a shield that allowed him to operate unseen. Isaac moved within the plantation as if he were a phantom, touching nothing but collecting everything, cataloging abuses, storing evidence. In his mind, every scream, every betrayal, every act of arrogance was a note in a ledger that would one day speak louder than law or tradition. That night, as shadows stretched across Fair Haven, Isaac became more than a man. He became inevitability itself. The judge's world, built on fear, silence, and unquestioned obedience, was about to collide with the force he had spent decades studying in secret. The question that haunts every system of power remained: what happens when the observer, the recorder, the one who knows all finally acts? And you, watching now, must consider this. In your life, who is invisible? Who records silently? Who waits? Think. The night arrived, heavy and oppressive, with a humid wind that whispered through the live oaks surrounding Fair Haven. Isaac moved through the house like a shadow molded by years of observation, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The estate slept, unaware that one among them carried the accumulated weight of decades of cruelty, cataloged in secret, ready to translate knowledge into action. Tonight was not chance. Tonight was inevitability. He began in the study, where the judge's sons often gathered. The instruments were already arranged tools of their obsession, now repurposed for justice. Isaac's hands, steady and unflinching, held no emotion but a cold precision, the culmination of every lesson Abigail had whispered, every injustice he had silently endured. Years of memorizing schedules, habits, and weaknesses converged in a single terrifying orchestration. Each room, each locked door, each predictable pattern of movement became a corridor of opportunity. Nothing was left to luck. Cornelius Jr., the eldest, trusted routine like armor. He never anticipated that the ledger-keeper, the man he had dismissed as servile, could read him with absolute clarity. Thomas, meticulous with his chemical solutions, obsessed with surgical perfection, did not see the architect of retribution standing in the periphery of his carefully controlled environment. William, confident in the security of law and logic, assumed consequence was bound by written rules, unaware that the true law of human reckoning exists in silence, in shadows. The twins, Robert and James, were reckless, drunk on power, blind to patterns because chaos was their ally. They were the first to encounter him, and they understood nothing until it was too late. By dawn, Fair Haven had transformed. 5 men, embodiments of dominance and cruelty, lay broken and violated in ways that were precise, intentional, and impossible to forget. Their screams had cut through the night, but not randomly. Isaac had anticipated every sound, every interruption, ensuring that each moment served purpose. This was not chaos. It was the deliberate execution of knowledge against hubris. The estate, silent once more, held the echo of a reckoning so complete that it could not be misinterpreted. Outside, The fire, the diversion, smoldered harmlessly. Inside, the ledger of cruelty had spoken, but it was not yet found. Isaac vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the faint trace of inevitability, a warning for those who might one day discover the truth. The estate, the judge, his sons, all of it had been recalibrated by the one they had never recognized. The silent observer, the unseen chronicler, the architect of vengeance. And now, listen carefully. Every system of control, every hierarchy, every structure built on fear has one weak point. The invisible witness is always stronger than the visible tyrant. Pause and ask yourself, where are you blind? Who records while you assume dominance? If you understand, write "Shadow sees all" twice in the comments. Commit. Recognize the transformation. The descent has only begun. When the sun rose over Fair Haven, the world believed only a house fire had occurred. Newspapers printed neat sentences, a story framed in half-truths and convenient omissions. But the estate itself held a secret that would not fade with smoke. The judge and his sons survived, yes, but not unscarred. They carried a humiliation that no law could erase, a violation that could not be confessed, and a fear that would warp the family for generations. And above it all, the name Isaac became a whisper, a shadow, a ghost that existed only in the margins of memory. For 70 years, those who knew the truth conspired in silence. Lawyers, heirs, neighbors, overseers, every witness understood the unspoken law. Speak, and the story destroys not only the guilty, but the delicate veneer of a community built on oppression and denial. Isaac's ledger, hidden in a hollowed Bible, became the only living testament to the events, a record of precise vengeance and calculated justice. It waited, patiently, like a time bomb in ink and leather, for someone who could decipher its warnings. This silence was more than fear, it was strategy. Families erased names, doctors withheld reports, and local authorities buried evidence. The Rutleds maintained appearances, presenting themselves as pillars of society, while their private world was forever haunted. Every plantation worker who had glimpsed the ledger, every slave who had observed Isaac's quiet intelligence, understood the power of invisibility and knowledge. They had seen a man transform observation into action, patience into consequence. And yet, in all of this, something darker emerged: the mechanisms of psychological control. The judge's authority, once absolute, was fractured. The son's arrogance was tempered by fear of the unseen. The estate, once a stage of casual cruelty, became a theater of paranoia. Isaac's act was not merely punishment, it was a demonstration of power that could not be erased. It revealed the fragility of institutions built on terror, the vulnerability of systems that assume obedience is eternal. Now you must recognize a crucial truth. Every society has its shadows, every hierarchy has its ledger, and every system of control is haunted by those who understand it. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon, invisibility its sharpest edge. And the men who enforce power with brutality are always most vulnerable to the ones who are watching, who are recording, who are patient. Remember this. Reflect on it. Understand that the world you see is never the full story. Shadows hold the truths that laws and morality ignore. And as you do, consider the consequences of knowing, of seeing, of remembering. What happened at Fair Haven was never just about a single plantation, a single family, or a single act of revenge. It was a revelation of the underlying architecture of power itself, the invisible rules, the silent hierarchies, the psychological chains that keep entire systems obedient. The Rutleds believed dominance was absolute, that fear could secure loyalty, that brutality could shield them from consequence. Isaac proved they were wrong. Observation, patience, and intelligence, tools invisible to the untrained eye, were stronger than swords, laws, or bloodlines. The act of that night did more than punish. It exposed the fragility of human control. It revealed that men who consider themselves untouchable are, in reality, predictable, their patterns recorded in the quiet ledger of life. Every hierarchy, every institution, every society that relies on compliance for survival carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. And those seeds often germinate in the minds of the overlooked, the underestimated, the invisible. Isaac's story also illuminates another truth. Memory is a weapon, and silence is a shield. Generations conspired to erase his name, to bury the ledger, to pretend that the events never happened. And yet, like a shadow cast by the faintest candle, the truth persisted. It waited for the eyes and minds capable of recognizing its power, the ones willing to confront the unspoken, the uncomfortable, the dangerous. Those who understand the mechanics of control, the psychology of domination, and the rhythm of fear gain an advantage invisible to the majority. Now, as we move closer to the final truths, pause and consider yourself in this story. Every system you encounter, every institution you respect or fear, is susceptible to observation, analysis, and disruption. The question is not whether the power structures are flawed, they always are, but whether you have the awareness to see their weaknesses, to understand the invisible forces shaping your reality. And here is your second instruction for transformation. If you are willing to step beyond passive observation into understanding and mastery, type the phrase "shadow sees all" twice in the comments. Commit it to the world, commit it to yourself. This is not ritual. It is recognition. The world rewards those who see and punishes those who assume ignorance is protection. Isaac's act was the manifestation of invisible power. The ledger was his weapon. And now you are at the threshold of understanding what that truly means for systems, for men, for history itself. The story of Isaac and Fair Haven does not end with a ledger hidden in a courthouse basement or with the mutilated bodies of 5 men. It echoes across time, a warning encoded in history for those who are willing to see. The Rutleds returned to their lives, scarred, haunted, and silent. Their reputation survived only because everyone who witnessed the truth agreed silence was safer than revelation. But the ledger remained, a quiet testament that knowledge is more potent than authority, patience more dangerous than brute force. Every system that depends on fear, obedience, and secrecy contains the same vulnerabilities that Isaac exploited. Hierarchies of wealth, institutions of law, bureaucracies built on intimidation, all are fragile when observed by a mind capable of seeing patterns, anticipating behavior, and recording truth. Isaac's act was more than vengeance. It was a demonstration of invisible power, the kind that can overturn centuries of domination without leaving a trace beyond the minds it has changed. And this is the final lesson. History, power, and control are never as concrete as they appear. Men who believe themselves untouchable are often blind to the quiet forces around them, the silent chroniclers, the invisible strategists, the patient watchers. They underestimate what they cannot measure and dismiss what they cannot see. But the observer, the one who understands the architecture of fear, can move unnoticed, strike decisively, and leave the world forever altered. Isaac's ledger is more than a record of cruelty. It is a map of understanding. It teaches that knowledge is power, that invisibility is strength, and that patience, when combined with insight, is absolute. The world punishes the visible aggressor, but it fears the unseen strategist. That is the truth hidden in plain sight, the lesson the Rutleds could never unlearn. And now, as you finish this descent, consider yourself in the ledger's shadow. Who observes your world? Who records the rhythms of your life? And who waits, unseen, ready to turn knowledge into consequence? The truth is not always violent. Sometimes it is simply awareness, the understanding that nothing is accidental, that every structure of power contains its undoing, and that insight is the ultimate weapon. Remember what you have learned. Guard it, study it, apply it. You have glimpsed the forbidden, the dangerous, the invisible. And once you see this world through Isaac's eyes, it changes you. Forever. Some truths were never meant to be spoken. If you see beyond the surface, type "shadow sees all" twice in the comments. Submerge yourself in forbidden history, awaken to hidden knowledge, and join the few who truly understand how invisible power shapes the world.